right, in this lecture we're going to talk a little bit about moral theory. Now, moral theory explains not how one event causes another, but why an action is right or wrong. So unlike science or other areas of observation where you're observing one action that causes another, we're not looking at how one event causes another. We're looking at why a certain event is right or why a certain event or a certain action is wrong. So, moral theory. How do moral theories fit into everyday life? So we can talk a lot about the theory, but how do we look at this from the perspective of a practical application? We have to look at theories of right action. So let's look at some of the theories of right action. The fundamental moral standard of a theory becomes a premise in a moral argument. So you have a fundamental moral standard, and that moral standard serves as the foundation for a theory, and that becomes a premise in a moral argument. An example would be, I hate to use something as mundane as stepping on a toe, but a fundamental moral standard of a theory would be that it is wrong to cause someone pain. Right? This becomes a premise in an argument. Therefore, every time you see that someone's causing someone else pain, you can appeal to this to say it is wrong to do so. See how that works? So first we come up with a moral standard. You shouldn't be causing other people pain. This would be malfeasance. So we should not be causing other people pain. That's a good premise. And we use that in an argument. If in a situation where somebody's causing pain, then you just appeal to that moral standard. Also, moral principles are supported or rejected by moral theories. It is wrong to take a human life, which is a moral principle supported by moral theories that respect the fundamental nature of human life. So a moral principle is one that is derived from a moral or ethical theory. So it is wrong to take a human life. That's a moral principle. And the reason why we assume or we take that premise to be true is because it's supported by a moral theory that respects the fundamental nature of human life. So if we have an ethical theory which suggests that human life is intrinsically valuable, therefore we can take the premise it is wrong to take a human life as a moral principle derived from that moral theory. And that fundamental aspect of that moral theory, which is the nature of human life, is sacred or it's intrinsically valuable. Our moral deliberations draw from and focus on the specific in general. It is wrong to take human life. In general, it is wrong to allow Susie to get away with killing her husband. That's a specific. So we have a general or abstract conceptual view, which is wrong to take human life. The specific would be it is wrong for Susie, in the specific situation, to kill her husband. That's a specific example of the general or conceptual premise, which is that it is wrong to take human life. Now, in moral theories, we have two types. We have consequentialist and non-consequentialist. So let's start with the consequentialist. This is the rightness of an action rests solely on the consequences of said action. So in this, a moral theory that is consequentialist is only interested in the consequences that are the result of that action or behavior. So if I am doing something and that something that I'm doing is causing something that I should not, that we see as being wrong, then that is grounds for not doing it. That's the consequences, right? The consequences of the action. One example would be utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is a consequentialist theory or ethical theory, which suggests that the consequences of an action are based on whether it causes happiness or creates happiness. So it is consequentialist. Now, the non-consequentialist, the rightness of an action does not rest solely on the consequence and considers the act's intrinsic nature. One example of this would be deontology. It doesn't matter if the consequences of the act is bad, good, doesn't matter. What matters is the actual act itself. An example would be telling the truth. for deontologists, it doesn't matter if you telling the truth is going to hurt other people. It could kill other people. It could completely destroy the entire universe. It doesn't matter what the consequences are. Intrinsically, you must be honest and tell the truth, no matter what the consequences are. This is a non-consequentialist theory. The act itself, intrinsically, is either right or either wrong. It has nothing to do with the consequences that result from the action. Most consequentialist is utilitarian, as I said. An example of a non-consequentialist theory is deontology. And deontology, which I'm not sure if we've discussed this yet, but has to do with a view by the German philosopher Immanuel Kant, who suggested that you have a duty to other people, to treat a person as an end in and of themselves. It comes from the word dion, which means a duty or an obligation, and it's the study of that obligation that you have to other people. Whereas utilitarianism, as it suggests, is utility. Whatever brings about the most happiness is the thing that you should do. Act and rule, utilitarianism. So we have act and rule. We're not going to really go into that. There's various forms of that. Kantian ethics, categorical imperative. It's a command to do something. So for Kant, he was really big on developing these things called categorical imperatives. There are rules that you make in order to suggest that this is the thing you should do, to command to do something. A hypothetical imperative, a command to do something if we want to achieve a certain outcome. Most common and relevant categorical imperative always act in a way that treats humanity as an end and not a means to an end. So this is the foundational categorical imperative, which is you must treat humanity, other people, as an end in and of themselves. And it doesn't matter what the consequences are, you have to do this. And principalism, we won't go into that. Natural law theory, just to touch on this, right actions are those that conform to moral standards discerned in nature through human reason. One advocate of this was St. Thomas Aquinas, and he saw that moral principles often conflict in nature or natural law, demanding one to fulfill two or more conflicting and incompatible principles or laws. In other words, natural law is something we observe in nature, and this is the basis for moral standards. And this is what St. Thomas Aquinas found to be a very compelling theory. Natural law theory, okay, we won't go into that. Natural law theory, doctrine of double effect, we won't go into that. Virtue ethics. Now, virtue ethics was an ethical theory that was developed by Aristotle quite a long time ago, and it's radically different. It focuses on the development of virtues and character. So it's not looking at what's going to create the most happiness in consequentialism. It's not looking at what obligation you have. Rather, it is the embodiment of particular characters and virtues. That's all it is, really simple. I think of it kind of like a superhero sort of theory, where you're trying to be like Spider-Man or trying to be like Superman. You're trying to embody these particular individuals. In this case, you're trying to be wise, or you're trying to be kind, or you're trying to be truthful. These are virtues that you're trying to embody. And by embodying these characters and these virtues, you are actually fulfilling these moral obligations. So you have utilitarianism, very simple. It's about happiness. Kantian, it's about treating others as an end in and of themselves, deontology. Virtue ethics, the embodiment of a specific virtue, or a combination of several, which would be wisdom and justice and all these other things. And then you have divine command, which we have not talked about that because God said so. It's a complete oversimplification, and in fact, divine command could embody all of these, right? But the idea is that God commands people to act in a certain way, and that is the reason why individuals should act in that particular way, because divine command of God says so, because God says so. Very simple. All right, that's the end of this lecture, and I'll be presenting some more lectures here pretty soon, and I'll see you guys on the flip side.